Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and tonight we have a special guest, Jenny Lockwood, who is a licensed clinical social worker and the owner of a private practice called the Path Forward Support Services. And Jenny, it's great to see you.
Hi, Alan. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And your private practice, where are you located, Jenny?
I'm in Arlington.
Okay. Yeah. Arlington, I remember growing up, just as a side note, my uncle would always joke of like Arlington is kind of the place, you drive around and you only go to watch the Cowboys and all that kind of stuff, but it's kind of boomed over the years, Arlington.
Yeah, it's really grown. But yeah, I still feel like exactly how your uncle described it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I usually just go to Fort Worth or go to Dallas.
Yeah. Is it true, because I'm new here to Texas, is it true that there's Fort Worth people and Dallas people and it's kind of split between
Yes, like absolutely. So it's kind of nice being in Arlington because I feel like I'm not like stuck in my city.
Yeah.
I have options. I can go either way.
Yeah. I haven't committed yet. I think I'll probably end up a Fort Worth person, but all of that aside, it's wonderful to have you in here tonight, and reading your bio and chatting with you prior, you have quite a lot of experience that I think is going to be valuable for the individuals who follow this channel. And I'm just looking forward to diving into it and hearing about kind of what got you into the field, why private practice, how did this progress for you?
Well, I started my private practice going on 4 years ago. And prior to that, I had done a variety of different things in social work landscape. I had been actually in managed care for like a health plan. Did that for 5 years or so, and was really just kind of wanting to do something where I felt a bit more challenged, and I was able to kind of get back to doing like one-on-one therapy again. And so I just finally made the leap and decided to work for myself.
Yeah. And when you say managed care, you're talking about like treatment centers and people who are checking themselves in, that kind of managed care?
Oh, no, it was for a healthcare plan. It was for, actually it was Star Kids Medicaid, so children that are on disability.
Yeah.
It was their Medicaid plan. And so I was working with the children themselves and the families to kind of help support through whatever disability. I primarily focused in mental health.
Yeah.
So,
how many sessions would you get with a family under a care plan like that?
well, it's more like getting them connected with other support systems. And so I'm kind of the link for that, or I was the link for that, and going in and working with the families. So, I mean, I would kind of take advantage of my time with them and kind of do some therapeutic work when I was in their homes with them. But I really wanted to make sure that they were set up with somebody more long-term.
Yeah. Social workers are, you guys are brave. Going in the homes. I mean, my buddies that I grew up as a therapist with early, and they were going into the homes and doing sessions and connecting services. I would just look and be like, you guys are brave.
Yeah, I guess if you think of it that way, I've been in a lot of people's houses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, it's like, I feel like the times I have done it, like when I've gone in for interventions in the past, and so, because I worked for the Salvation Army for the beginning years as a clinician, and you get a different assessment piece when you see like people's homes and how they tend to their homes.
Absolutely. It just gives you a lot more information about them that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah. And so you were working with kids. Reading your bio, you also now work with adolescents and adults.
Yes.
And what kind of drew you, because you were saying a minute ago, like, I wanted to get back to the nitty-gritty clinical work.
Right.
What drew you back to working with adolescents and just adults in that more intimate clinical setting?
Well, I've always worked with adolescents in some capacity in my career. I was a school social worker for about 10 years or so, and worked in intensive outpatient programs in adolescent units. So that was always kind of a passion of mine. I really enjoy working with teenagers. I think it's a rough time of year, or time of life rather.
Yeah.
And I think, it's kind of a misunderstood time of life. And so I think if, as much support as they can get in understanding about what's happening to them, and also helping the parents understand that as well.
Right.
I really enjoy doing that. And then, just with private practice, just so happen that a lot of adults want therapy as well.
They do.
Yeah, and so that has actually been a very pleasant surprise for me, is that how much I enjoy working with adults.
Yeah. Especially I think in the private practice setting, because when they're reaching out to you at that level of care, they're pretty balanced. Obviously there are things that they're reaching out to sort out, but they're ready to do the work.
Right.
The adolescents are also ready to do the work. They don't necessarily fully understand why, I think is sometimes the way I've experienced working with teenagers, but it's interesting.
It is. And well, some of them are ready to do the work and other ones aren't, but that's okay. Just try to meet them where they're at.
Yeah. What do you typically find yourself doing with the teenagers? Is it traditional talk therapy a lot of times, or are you still doing kind of some of the like young developmental type stuff with them?
Oh yeah, we're still doing talk therapy, but I usually just am trying to make it interactive, and like we'll just sit on the floor and play games while we talk, or play cards, something like that. Something to kind of distract them from just the one-on-one looking at me kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I tell my friends that come over, because I do a board game night once a month with a group of friends, and I have a massive Uno collection, like all the different types. This is a fun fact about me. And they'll always ask, like, what got you into it? And it was therapy. I was working with teenagers in a high school classroom, and the best way that they would open up is we would sit and play Uno. And it just like, I started buying all these different versions, and then it became like a little hobby of mine. But
well, that's good to know, because I play a lot of Uno.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize there were all these different versions to it.
Yeah, there's like any show or movie you can imagine. There's all kinds of types of Unos. Yeah.
Okay. Check
Or
that
like
out.
from my childhood, Pokemon was huge.
Yeah.
So I tried to collect all the Pokemon version of Unos. But before we go too deep into how much of a nerd I am, I'm sure a lot of the parents that listen to the show would love to hear your insights. And for those listening, Jenny has been in the field for over 20 years. So the insights we're going to get tonight are going to be, I think, just nuggets of wisdom, and just from reading, your bio and your information on your Psychology Today and your website, it's clear to me as a clinician is why I wanted to have you on, is hear someone who knows what she's talking about. And I'm curious if you could put some words to, or just whatever you'd like to share about the phases that maybe adolescents are in that that therapy can be helpful for.
Well,
I know that's generic.
Yeah. I think of adolescence as kind of segments. And so we have like the early adolescent phase, where it's really kind of like 11, 12, through, I don't know, like 14, 15 or so. And they're really just going through like explosive brain development.
Yeah.
Their sexual maturation comes on board, and they're really starting to want to connect more socially and start to kind of pull away a little bit from their parents, which can be a hard transition. They're not like your cuddly little kid, like your little kid anymore.
Yeah.
All of a sudden they want to be in their room and kind of left alone and just want to be with their friends all the time. But that's completely normal. And that's a process that people have to go through to be able to become like independent adults.
Yeah.
And then, then we have kind of like this middle stage of adolescence, like that, I don't know, like 16, 17, 18, where they're really starting to form a bit more of their identity. Developing more independent skills, hopefully, kind of getting out of high school and transitioning to, like a trade school or employment or college, something like that. And then late adolescence goes all the way into your 20s. So it's lots of phases to the whole sort of term of adolescence. Yeah.
I think it's important that you highlight that last part, the latter part of it branches into those early 20s. A lot of people, I think, they're 18, they're an adult now.
Right.
And that in a lot of ways is true. And I think a lot of teenagers can kind of start showing some of that autonomy even earlier than that. But hearing you piece it together, number one, as I'm listening, it's like, well, it's good to talk to another clinician and see that these things are still fresh in my mind and I'm on the right track when I'm talking with the parents that I work with. But if we just kind of take it just piece by piece of what you highlighted, that 12 to 14 kind of phase, it's, do you find, this is just my experience, I'm curious if you feel this way, they're the first developmental tasks typically of like what's right and what's wrong, and it can get real concrete. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are probably going through some of that. And first of all, again, if there's a different way you would state that, or if you don't agree with that, I would love to hear, because I just want to learn and listen too. So would you state that any other way, or add anything to like what's going on during that 12 to 14?
That they're really kind of getting on board with like morals and right and
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I would definitely agree with that. There's a lot of development around there. And I think that's why it's important to also kind of be aware of what they're exposed to, because that plays an influence
Yeah.
into that development.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I didn't see in my mind it going this way as far as like something I would share, but you were asking me before the show, like, what made you want to do this? And part of it, even for adults, is like everywhere you look on social media, it is content that it just blows up your attention span. There's a lot of, I think, I wouldn't necessarily just say like blindly negative content, as much as like morally gray content.
Right.
And I think part of doing stuff like this is like, well, let's just have genuine conversations and share knowledge. And you're touching on that with how important it is for adolescents, especially when they're in that very first kind of prepubescent place, and this is right and this is wrong, and then they come across something on social media and there's some person with no experience saying this is right. That can be dangerous.
Right. And it's such an influential time. And so, you're hearing all of this other stuff, and, kind of depending on, I guess, how influential that person is.
Yeah.
It's very easy to kind of grab a hold of that information and really take that as truth, where it might very well not be. And,
Right.
Can kind of be kind of dangerous.
Yeah. Do you see that happen a lot these days where, I'm sure the answer is clearly yes, but like, it's like a wave where this person just so happens to be super influential online, and then all the little boys are talking this way and all the little girls are talking this way. And then the one I hear a lot is like, oh, I'm alpha. I hear that from like a lot of young dudes. I'm like, what does that even mean,
Yeah.
bro? Yeah.
I know I need to get better at the lingo.
Yeah.
Out of touch with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would agree with that. It's definitely kind of waves of kind of what's in, what's kind of popular.
Yeah. How do you, since you work and have worked a lot with both, how are you helping families like navigate or maybe even mitigate some of those kind of situations that can go sideways? Are you an advocate for kids not being on social media, or like that age range not being, like having smartphones and things like that? Or do you have an opinion on those things?
Personally, I would delay it as long as you possibly can. I realize that that's not very realistic.
Right.
But I think the longer that you can wait for your child to be on social media and have that type of presence, the better.
Yeah.
There's just so much negative influence. There's a lot of comparing yourself to what you're seeing on there, which just leads to, for a lot of teens, feeling inadequate, feeling not good enough about themselves. And they're already struggling with identity and figuring out who they are and what they're into, comparing themselves to their peers, and just adding all of that social media pressure. I think can really have a negative impact on their mental health.
Yeah. And I think, the research over the next decades is going to show this more and more, because there's this conversation I was having with another male clinician, because we'll get a lot of young men that are coming in, and they are terrified to approach anything like relationships, dating, anything sexual. And it plays into the part you were mentioning of like, then we transition into that mid-teenage years, and they're being inundated with like, real dangerous pieces of content. And I think it's affecting young men in that way, where they're like not even approaching women anymore. I don't know what the direct link will end up panning out to be, but I think that's certainly a factor. Like in their teen years, especially like starting maybe 10 years ago, it started to get really risque on the social media side of things.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you're kind of starting to see that trend with the young men.
Yeah, like young 20s. Yeah, and it's, there's humor to it, but it's a real issue, because like I'll remind them like, hey, they're just human beings. you know, or like it's also like because I have a few individuals, you know, who are also, they're young men interested in men, and it's like they're terrified of each other. It's like they're just human beings,
Right.
you know.
Do you think that some of that plays into the young people live so much of their life on their phone, like they're in their phone? That's where their sort of world exists.
Yeah.
They communicate with their friends, you know, they don't even text, they just like Snapchat each other.
I know. I don't know what's going on.
I don't
these
get
days.
that, but whatever. Versus kind of going, you know, like picking up the phone and having a conversation on the phone, or interacting in person.
Yeah.
There's just not, I think, as much of that as there certainly was when I was a teenager.
Yeah, you know, and cell phones started to become a thing like when I was well into middle school, which probably gives away kind of the phase of life I'm in my age and that kind of stuff. But I do think that that's a huge factor, you know, because it's like, is it a developmental thing, or is it that it's just so much disconnected now? And we've talked a lot about that. Like even sometimes we'll have conversations with the producers, and they'll chime in on it, where it's like everything is inundated. Like it's all social media all the time.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a huge factor in why younger crowds aren't connecting with each other, because they're siloed on the phones.
Yep.
I talk about that with my therapist sometimes, of like, be careful in the ways that you're interacting with people when it's electronics, because all of that communication is happening for you, right? It can become very selfish, very self-seeking, especially in the realms of relationships. You got to have conversations with people and get out there and be a part of a community.
Right. And if you live your life in your phone, you're not developing those skills.
Yeah. Yeah, which would take us right into that latter part of
Yep.
adolescence. You
Absolutely.
know? It's like you're not developing the skills, or maybe having a hard time filling that out
Yeah.
right as you're trying to develop your identity.
Yeah.
That's, I mean,
And a
that's
lot
gotta
of
be hard.
anxiety
Yeah.
around that.
Yeah.
And feeling like I don't, you know, are they going to judge me? What if I say something wrong? And, you know, all of those aspects, because maybe they're not as comfortable being kind of in one-on-one situations and having just conversations with face-to-face.
Yeah. Yeah. And, man, it's just, you ask, that question you asked is really good, because I think it highlights the picture of how much time it's going to take to really understand what technology has done to mental health.
Right.
We already know, and this is the part that trips me out, is it's such an effective tool, but we already know that the negatives outweigh the benefits for our psyche. And that's kind of freaky when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it fascinating that the developers of all of this tech, like the big developers, are like, oh, my child's not on, they don't have a phone. They're not on social media.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
That's really telling.
I know a lot of parents who, because of those things, you know, like the developers of these apps aren't even letting their own kids use phones. That was the information they needed to take their kids off of it. And
Yeah.
like you were saying earlier, it's like try to delay it as long as possible, no matter how unrealistic it is. And we had an occupational therapist on here weeks ago. Her name's Veena Raj, and I wish I could remember the name of the phones that they have, but they look like smartphones, but they're not.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was such a brilliant idea, because then they don't have to be at school feeling like they're left out or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think even just from thinking about it from a neurological perspective and like brain development, you know, it's their brain is going through this whole another growth. It's like akin to being a toddler. And so, you know, your brain's going in and it's pruning itself, and it's like cutting out all of these neural networks that aren't being used and really building up the ones that are being used. So if you're spending so much time on social media, so much time playing video games, like that's the neural network that's getting really well built.
Yeah.
And maybe the one for like reading or playing the piano or something else that maybe you did in the past, but you're not doing so much anymore, that's kind of being pruned away. And so, you know, I'm very interested to see like you were saying, like 10 years from now, when we have all these adolescents who are now adults who have spent a lot of time in their adolescent brain development phase of getting really strong neural networks around being on the phone.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw a video right as I'm scrolling through social media mindlessly in my own spare time. I saw a video where it was a kid. He was like playing a video game, had his phone on it, and he's like scrolling. And then he's got like music over here where it's like a tablet, and he's like scrolling like that to choose. And I'm just like, my goodness, it's just in your face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's going to like give everybody like ADHD. Like everyone's going to have an attention deficit disorder.
Yeah. You know, I don't know how you feel on kind of like the pushes over the years with that diagnosis, but it's interesting because it's almost like the framework was set. I'll tread very lightly here because we don't want a pharmaceutical company to come in and shut us down. But, you know, the framework was set with that diagnosis, then the pharmaceuticals for like exactly what's happening now. You know, and the reality is like there are a ton of kids out there who legitimately have these symptoms. And then those who like something else is happening.
Yeah.
Like when you were saying like the pruning of the things that are going to make them like autonomous individuals with agency and adulthood are being like pruned away, and this like, you know, marching towards like I can't pay attention to anything is like being built.
Yeah.
And then it's being medicated. And I don't have like too strong of an opinion on those things. That's just more of like an observation from a therapist that you can take it or leave it. But I'm curious how you feel on some of those kind of things, and not maybe so much an opinion, but just like, I mean, if you have one, I'd love to hear it, but how you feel seeing those things because you work with adolescents.
You know, I haven't maybe seen that piece of it as much, like having these sort of ADD kind of symptoms like during adolescence. I normally the adolescents that come into my office are more dealing with kind of depression and things like that. I mean, certainly some of them really do have classic ADHD symptoms, and I don't know if that's attributed to their social, I mean, you know, kind of their online presence or not, and all the screens, or if they truly have ADHD. But I definitely think it could be something that will kind of be trending in the future.
Yeah. I'm curious too, is like, will it be the traditional way that we've seen it, or is that going to adapt and we have to come up with a new explanation for what's happening? And that kind of stuff fascinates me because it's like we do adapt and change in our like mental presentations, and God only knows. We'll see.
Yeah, I work with a lot of adults that have ADHD. Well, actually, they're getting diagnosed later in life with ADHD, and they didn't, you know, they had no idea that that's what was kind of going on with their brain. And I think for them, their symptoms present very differently than like what it would for maybe a teenager.
Right.
And they're not necessarily spending all this time on electronics. I mean, certainly they might be mindlessly scrolling like we all do. But their symptoms are really more around like kind of executive functioning and things like that.
Yeah. As best you could on just like a layman's kind of level, how would you describe executive functioning to those who are listening, and just kind of how you're treating that?
Yeah, it's kind of like your ability to kind of problem solve during the day, kind of like your working memory, being able to remember things, being able to kind of have tasks that you're able to like start and then be able to complete, you know, the whole process. I mean, there's a lot that goes into kind of our executive functioning, but typically an ADHD person has their functioning skills are less than like somebody who doesn't have ADHD.
Yeah.
So it's a lot harder for them to kind of get things done. For example, you might recognize that you need to do your laundry. And so you're like, okay, well, I got to do laundry, even though it's boring, so I'm going to go do it. Otherwise, I'm not going to have anything to wear. Whereas like an ADHD person, they might really procrastinate on that because it's so boring to them that that's really difficult to get started.
Yeah.
And so they just put it off and put it off and put it off until the last minute. And then all of a sudden their brain kicks into gear and you're like, oh, okay, now I need to get this done, and I can get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just the way that you're highlighting that, I think of a client, who I was working with today earlier, and when she first came to me, it masqueraded as severe depression. And like clinicians, we know that will come and go. And if you have that symptomology, it doesn't mean that some of these other things can't exist. But as you're saying, it's like that's exactly how she was describing this work task to me today. And we've talked a lot about, attention type of strategies, because I maybe those listening have run into it, and maybe you've seen it too. Is like it's hard to get an ADHD or ADD diagnosis properly for an adult,
Right?
Because there's no one's gonna like use any specific assessment for
Right. I don't
for
think there
adults.
even is a formal assessment instrument that's sort of like the go-to standard.
Yeah, it's like all of them are that get used out, like for someone who is going to do one, they almost mirror like depression symptom assessments. But it's interesting because like I have a client who went to seek the diagnosis, and he went through the full psychological assessment because that's the only thing they could do. And I tried to coach him and educate him on that. It's like they're not going to sit you down and give you some assessment and be like, this is for ADD and you have ADD.
Right.
It's like these things are done for children. And if maybe you were in an environment when you were young where you weren't going to therapy or no one was catching these things, it can be real hard in your adult life to sort these things out, and therapy is probably your best option.
Yeah. The good news is, though, is that researchers are actively trying to develop an assessment instrument, and so hopefully that will come out in the next few years, and it will make our jobs a lot easier.
Yeah, and from all angles, it'd be nice to be able to assess and know for certain this is or isn't, as best we could. And right now it's kind of like you take 3 or 4 different clusters of symptoms and try to figure out, can we rule all of this out?
Right.
And then that's what's left. And
Right.
yeah,
It's challenging, right? Because things present so differently. So, my mind is racing and I can't stop thinking about things, and I just have a million thoughts in my head and I'm really restless. Well, that also sounds like anxiety.
Right.
That could sound like trauma.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of overlap.
There is, yeah. Which brings us to something I'm real curious about, and I was asking you a little bit off the air, is you're certified in EMDR.
Right. Well, I'm trained in it.
Trained in it.
Yes.
Trained in
Yeah.
it. Yeah. And for those who may not know, EMDR stands for, it's the
Eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Yes, I'm glad you shared it because I would have butchered it. Yeah. And so you've been doing that, you said, for about 4-ish years. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have a lot of clients who seek you out specifically for EMDR that you offer?
I have some. I think a lot of people don't necessarily know what that is. So certainly, if I do have clients that are aware of what EMDR is, and or they've had it before and they're just needing a different therapist at a different point in their life, and they are seeking that out.
Yeah.
And then a lot of clients who maybe have some trauma history aren't aware of that modality. So I do a lot of talking about what that is, and then we'll end up utilizing that.
Yeah. So I'll just pretend and ask you as though like I've never heard of.
Yeah.
So any type of trauma EMDR would work for, like emotional trauma, physical, you know. All of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I even use it sometimes where maybe a person doesn't have like a specific trauma incident that we're targeting, but they have maybe a lot of anxiety. Like they'll have like real negative core beliefs about themselves. And so we'll figure out, okay, what is this core belief that you have about yourself? Let's just say I'm worthless. Okay. What are some memories that you have that's attached to this belief that are still really upsetting when you think about it? And so we can use EMDR to process those memories, and kind of reconsolidate that and turn down the emotional volume on those memories and experiences, and start to reprogram that core belief into something that's more positive.
Yeah. Yeah. And because I know this is my limited understanding, I participated in a training once of like I was sitting in the back of the room just to see if I was interested, and I liked it. I don't know why I didn't go in those directions. I do other things, but you come in for EMDR and you have to do the best word I have for it, not knowing the actual terms. Like the first sessions with that is like you ground. You do all the grounding. Is that also the phase where you would start to identify those like core beliefs and things of that nature, or is that going to come in later phases of the EMDR?
I think it kind of depends. If, let's say, a person's coming in and they know they want to do EMDR to work on a specific trauma, then, we've already kind of had a conversation about what that traumatic event might be. And so the initial phase really is doing more of that resource development and making sure, like, I'm teaching them resourcing skills. And there's a couple specific ones that I give actually most of my clients, whether we do EMDR or not. And I'm wanting them to practice that in between our sessions so that they know that if we ever need that in an EMDR session, it's going to work. And so that's kind of like the first phase. And then that's when we kind of go in and do what's called a target sequence plan. And we're just kind of mapping out, like, this trauma happened, but what is this trauma that happened to you? What does that mean about you? And usually that's kind of helping the client get at this belief that they have about themselves in relation to that experience. And then that's when we kind of just map out all the memories that we're going to target.
Yeah. And so you're really, which every clinician I've ever talked to or known who does EMDR, they're, it sounds like, as I'm listening to you, like those sessions in the beginning are really like, we're mapping out this foundation for you.
Right.
And my understanding too of EMDR and just any trauma work in general, but especially EMDR, is like, we're not going into any of the rapid eye movement stuff until this is fleshed out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, sometimes I've had clients that they really want to work on their trauma, but they're just maybe not ready for that yet because their body still gets too dysregulated. And so we actually do a lot of work on helping them learn how to regulate their nervous system so that when we do the EMDR and they are having to kind of target that memory again and maybe other stuff that pops up along the way during the processing, their nervous system can be a bit more regulated, like they're not getting flooded in the session, because the first thing I want to do is make sure my clients are safe.
Yeah.
And if they're getting dysregulated, they're getting flooded in a session, that does not feel safe.
Yeah. Do you use like tracking scales of any kind that you like to like track with them week to week, or do you guys just talk it through? Like in your
kind of both. I mean, I'll use like it's called the PCL-5 especially if they have a PTSD diagnosis, and so we'll kind of start with the baseline number and then we'll kind of track like how that's going down over time.
Nice.
So I'll re-administer that.
And how many clients do you typically see?
Anywhere between kind of 15 and 20 a week.
And currently, are there openings on your practice?
Yeah. So the summertime always gets a little lighter.
Yeah, it does. It does. Vacations. And, I just woke up to some of the emails today of like, I'll contact you in August. Like, all right, enjoy your summer. I'll see you soon. Yeah.
I know it's sunny out. Nobody wants to talk about the problems.
Yeah, they want to do that when they're like cold and wrapped up and cozy. They want to start talking about their feelings.
Yeah. So, yes, to answer your question, I do have openings right now.
Yeah. So I want to make sure, just because we're probably somewhere in the mid of our discussion, where can our viewers find your information, your practice?
So, well, my website is a really great one to go to. So it's thepathforwardtx.com. I have a Psychology Today profile, like you mentioned. I do take a couple of insurance, and so I work with Alma, the platform, to kind of handle all the billing around that. And so then a lot of clients find me on that kind of a therapy directory that they have.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Perfect.
So for those listening, I don't know which camera we're on right now, but for those listening, Evan, our producer, is putting the website in the description. If you're liking what Jenny is talking about and you're thinking, hey, I kind of want to work on some of these things. Oh, I see it, Evan. It's the red light. I'm new to this room, so bear with me, guys. This has been a fun night. You'll see it in the description, and you can just click right on it, and it'll take you to Jenny's website, and I'm sure right on there, just as I navigated it when we were first chatting, you should be able to find all the clickable places if you wanted to set up an appointment. So.
Yes, absolutely. And there's even a whole EMDR page on there where people can read more about it if they want to.
Yeah, very cool. So what's next for you, just kind of in your career, and where you kind of see things going for you?
I'm really trying to kind of expand my practice to where I'm offering more supportive services.
Yeah.
That's maybe kind of adjacent to therapy. So wanting to start incorporating more yoga. So I've got my yoga teacher training. So wanting to offer that with clients, whether they're wanting to kind of extend a session and do some yoga in the session,
Oh, cool.
or just accessing maybe some yoga videos that I've made that are kind of targeting like specific things. Like if I'm feeling anxiety, okay, well, this is a yoga sequence that I created that's to help manage anxiety, or the opposite, like depression, things like that. And I'm also working on creating some mindfulness courses and workshops.
Yeah.
So hopefully clients can come in. I talk a lot about mindfulness and, some meditation. I know that's not for everybody, but just the idea of trying to be more present
Yeah.
in the moment. But that takes practice, and it's a skill that you have to develop. And so trying to create some workshops around that where clients can kind of take a course
Yeah.
on how to do that.
Well, that'll be great because I work with 12-steppers, mostly like friends and family members of alcoholics, and I work with a lot of those who are, coming out of the substance use into recovery. And I mean, meditation is a part of their program. So
Okay.
it'll be nice to know there's a clinician nearby where I could just say, hey, go check some of this stuff out.
Yeah.
Because, I found for 12-steppers, and I've done it my whole career working with individuals in recovery, is like those who meditate, those who pray, to whatever version of a higher power they've decided, and take a program of action around those things. So those are the ones who are getting better.
Yeah.
By leaps and bounds, and so it is it's one of those where it's like you see it on social media, and it's like a pop psych term in
Right.
some circles, but it's like this is tangible stuff. Like you practice these things, you're going to feel better.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much research and data to support the efficacy of a meditation practice and it being just as effective as taking medication.
Yeah, or like go figure. I work with like dudes, and it's always funny to me when I'll have like a dude who's just as covered in tats as I am. He'll come in and be like, dude, I did yoga this weekend. I'm like, dude, it was nice, all right?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and that stuff is just it's so helpful when you're trying to sort through your emotions and you don't have a lot of places to turn emotionally yet. Taking some of those recommendations can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't need anything to meditate.
Right.
I mean, well, maybe you need a phone or something to listen to a guided meditation if that feels more supportive for you in practicing, but you can just meditate without that as well. I teach my clients when I'm trying to introduce that to them is just doing a simple one around like you're just anchoring to your breath. And so that's your focal point.
Yeah.
It's just your breathing, and you don't have to necessarily alter your breathing. It's just noticing your breathing. And when your mind wanders away, and it's going to wander away, not kind of judging yourself for that, but when you notice that that's happened, just circling back to the breath.
Yeah. And there's something so practical about even the way you stated that. It's like, I remember in the beginning, I would hear someone like, don't, in your own mind, don't judge yourself when your mind wanders, like around meditation. Cause it's such a practical way to look at it. And I remember early on in my, cause I started in my young 20s and I would hear that stuff and I'd be like, that's corny. Just like anything that works, it always sounds corny. But what I share with people is like, it's so tangible when you really allow yourself to communicate that way and to latch on to that type of like self relationship. I'm not going to judge myself.
Right.
Maybe I have a lot of models that have taught me to do that, and hearing a clinician remind me that is also why I've stepped into this, to accept those resources.
Absolutely. It's just an act of self-compassion, and it's something that we don't do a lot of to ourselves or for ourselves.
Yeah, I get reflected by, I have a really good group of people around me, and sometimes I like to be like, well, I just like to try to make people laugh and stuff. And sometimes because of the way I grew up, I'll make like self-deprecating comments,
Sure.
and I have to take the reflections, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's another part, is like having good people around you, having a good clinician who's working with you. Because without those reminders, I was just doing that all the time. It was what I was shown. That's kind of how dudes operate. I played baseball my whole life. That's kind of how we talk to each other on a baseball field. And, you know, with emotions, I was like a bull in a china shop when I was first started to work towards becoming a therapist. And it was a lot of those things, and trusting what you're talking about tonight, that opened this doorway, you know, that I didn't even know existed, emotionally speaking.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad, you know, just to have another clinician on here for another week who shares these messages, because I do tend to pull in a male crowd as well,
Right.
with some of the stuff that I do. And, you know, and I always share, I'll like look and like, dudes, this is the stuff that you want to have healthy relationships. You want to build a family. You want to, you know, be at more peace in your life. You got to do these things, you know, meditate, see a therapist. You got some trauma, sort it out, get grounded,
Right.
you know.
Absolutely. And the reality is we all have trauma. Now,
Yeah.
whether it's a big T trauma or a little T trauma.
Yeah, I haven't heard that term since grad school. That took me back.
Yeah. But I mean, we all have stuff, right?
Yeah.
We all have things that we've experienced in our life that have probably created or reinforced some limiting beliefs. And that's how we're showing up in the world.
Right.
And, you know, if we can start to tackle that and deal with it, it really is going to shift how we interact with people, how we feel about ourselves, how we are just overall functioning.
Yeah. And I get a sense, just even from hearing you describe your practice and the way you describe things and how you were just stating that, it's very action based. If someone is to come and see you, it's like they're going to process with you, but I hear that your approach is also very much like, let's get you into action.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got 50 minutes a week with me.
Yeah.
Right? And so that is not a lot of time. I mean, the work really is in between the sessions.
Yeah.
And the practicing the stuff that we're talking about. And it's hard in the beginning because your brain is hardwired for how you are in the, you know, currently coming in, and we're trying to do something different, and you're going to forget to do it. And so kind of trying to establish a routine early on like, okay, I'm consistently practicing. I'm going to set aside this time each day just to do a little bit of practice around that so that I can start building that habit.
Right. I'm going to go easy on you with this question because I know this can be really vague. So what I'll set the stage for is like, maybe just choose the ones you're passionate about. Is like, what's one recommendation for action that you would make for a teenager to start to feel better? Maybe, and you can choose whatever the ailment is as well for either, and then for an adult. Like, what's some action that you find yourself like enjoying recommending?
Yeah. I think it might sound simplistic, and I would say it would be the same for an adolescent or an adult, but trying to get into a daily practice of reflecting on your day and identifying what went well.
Yeah.
So whether you want to call that a gratitude practice,
Yeah.
or just this was some positive things that happened. You know, so often our brain is our brain just defaults to the negative. I mean, just from an evolutionary standpoint,
Right.
It's just easier to do that. And so we really have to train our brain to find positive things.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you an advocate? Well, I mean, obviously I probably know the answer to this, but just for those who are getting to know you, are you an advocate of them writing these things down?
If that speaks to them, sure.
I like that. Yeah. So what other ways would you recommend other than, because that's my personal favorite. I like all my clients know after they work with me for some time, I probably should go get a journal.
Yeah.
But what are some of the other ways for those listening that they could work a gratitude or an inventory kind of process?
Sure. I mean, you know, they can just as easy, you know, like you're getting ready to go to bed or something, and you're just maybe sitting there quietly, just kind of reflecting internally on how things went. Certainly just sharing it with your parents or sharing it with your partner. I think that can kind of even be a lovely practice as well too. Even at like the dinner table, everybody's just sort of taking turns sharing things that went well in their day. And so that's another way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it interesting that like we don't live in traditional times, but the traditional things emotionally speaking are seeing a resurgence of like sit down and talk to your family, and sit at the dinner table when you do it. Turn the show off, right? It may be a great show. I grew up watching Big Brother, the show, and I always looked forward to it, but it was after dinner. Right. And some of those things, just even as I'm listening to you, and I've talked with other clinicians, you hear a push for like the morals and values to come back into this process. And I don't think it ever really fully went away, but I think for some parts of like younger populations who aren't maybe yet in a family kind of dynamic that they're building on their own, and we know that that's taking longer for young adults to build, providing that for yourself, that can be, it's like sit down at your own table, Thank you.
Yeah. And not having distractions.
Yeah.
Which is a great way to practice mindfulness.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because any distraction, this is what my therapist always used to tell me when I first started working with her. Her name is Sharon. I love her to death. When you're engaged in a distracting behavior, it's because there's a big emotion, right? Or at least a deep one, that you're distracting yourself from. Even when you're doing the things that you think that like, I love this and I enjoy, it's like, it's like I talk with men a lot and they'll play video games for hours and hours and hours. And I just love it. I'm like, yeah, but you could love it for 2 hours. Right. You don't have to love it for 8, exactly. That's a job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, this is anecdotal, but I think as a society as a whole, we're not good with being comfortable with uncomfortable emotions. Yeah. And so we find lots of avoidance or lots of distraction tactics. Yeah. Because even feeling bored feels uncomfortable. So I'm like, I can't just be, I have to do. So if I don't have anything to do, then I'm just going to like scroll on my phone. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's if you're in a space where those emotions haven't caused you a lot of pain.
Right.
That's a whole nother realm.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I could go on and on about
I know,
emotions.
We're definitely going to have you back on because I think some of those discussions would be really good. And I'll chat with you offline about I'm going to be doing some panel stuff soon. And I think your perspectives would be really great, like in a discussion.
Excellent.
Around some of those things.
Yeah. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a couple questions for you. I ask everybody. What was your favorite childhood cartoon?
The Smurfs.
The Smurfs?
Yeah. Okay.
Is there a specific one or? I don't even know the names of the Smurfs.
I don't remember the name, but it's the Lady Smurf. She's the only one.
Oh, yeah.
Smurfette. Yeah. Smurfette,
Evan, you're the man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Smurfette. How would Smurfette benefit from coming to see you for therapy?
Oh, gosh. Oh, poor Smurfette. She's all caught up in the ideals of being a girl, being a female in this world. So probably helping her form her own unique identity.
There you go. Yeah. That's a good way to tie in a big part of the discussion we were having. Yeah. If you were going to build a mental health amusement park, what would be the first ride that you built and why? Oh,
goodness. That stumped me. I have no idea.
Could be anything.
Mental health, I don't know. I don't really think of amusement parks as like adrenaline seeking things or like something scary. I have no idea. You're going to have me back on so I can answer this question. I'm really going to have to think about that.
I'll let you sit with that one. I won't force an answer on that one. And that one's interesting. Some people have been like, I don't even like amusement parks. I'm like, oh, all right. Yeah. But yeah. So we'll get Jenny's answer next time when we have her on. But any last nuggets of wisdom or information that you would like to share with those who are maybe listening to this and they tune into this show to get some information on what could help them feel better?
Yeah, I think just being open and willing to do a bit of a deeper dive into yourself. It sounds really scary, but if you've got the support of a therapist that you really gel and connect with, it really isn't as scary as it sounds.
Yeah.
There are a lot of amazing therapists out there that have a lot of knowledge and a lot of tools and are able to offer support.
Yeah.
I think, the most important thing is just having a good rapport and relationship with your therapist so that it feels safe to be able to talk about stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's okay to feel scared,
Absolutely.
but we're just people too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Jenny.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Jenny Lockwood, it's been an absolute pleasure. You can find her website in the description, thepathforwardtexas.com, correct?
TX.
TX.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it'll be down there in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll also find it in the description below. And tune in every Friday night, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, Breaking the Cycle. We break the cycle together. We love you. Thank you.
Great.
Cool. Evan, thank you, sir.